for our Stop and Listen What Customers Need session at the 2023 ISO annual meeting here in Brisbane, Australia. My name is Karine Riley-Chakos. I am General Manager Operations with Standards Australia, and it's my absolute pleasure to be joined by a fantastic panel today to have this conversation about the perspective of customers and also of members of ISO on how we can better understand our customers and better meet their expectations. Before I introduce you to our speakers, I just need to run through a little bit of housekeeping. So the session today is being taking place in English, but we do have translation, interpretation in French and Spanish is available for both virtual and in-person participants. We really want to have a very lively engagement, but we would ask you to please submit your questions to the panelists via the platform, both for our remote attendees, but also for those attending here. And you can also vote up your favorite questions, and we'll make sure that we're tackling them and addressing them. The session is also being recorded today, and all of the materials that are being presented here, supported, and you'll be able to view it later as well at the platform. So, joining us today, we have Maria Skau. She is the Director of International Policy and Public Affairs at Danish Standards. Maria, it's great to be on the stage with you again. For those that attended the ISO annual meeting last year, we had a fantastic engagement there. We have Alistair Prosser, who is the Assistant Director Quality Management for the Australian Radiation Protection and Nuclear Safety Agency, ARPANSA. On my left, we have Khalid A. Reis, Director General of Business Development for the Saudi Standards SASO. Welcome. And we also have Una Lidi, Executive Director, Business Development for Logic. So welcome. Before we kickstart our questions, let's hear from Steve Jobs.
And one of the things I've always found is that you've got to start with the customer experience and work backwards to the technology. You can't start with the technology and try to figure out where you're going to try to sell it. And I've made this mistake probably more than anybody else in this room. And I've got the scar tissue to prove it. And I know that it's the case. And as we have tried to come up with a strategy and a vision for Apple, it started with what incredible benefits can we give to the customer? Where can we take the customer? Not starting with, let's sit down with the engineers and figure out what awesome technology we have, and then how are we going to market that? And I think that's the right path to take.
Jobs said those famous words back in 1997, and as we know, Apple has moved on to make some significant changes to our society. I want to start with Maria on this very specific point where if we know very well that we need to start with the customer first, why is it that as in the world of standards, we haven't necessarily achieved that yet? There's one track and one size somehow needs to fit all. What are your reflections on it?
I mean, first of all, I think we have to realize that we do not sell headphones or hearing aids or iPhones. So I think that's a complete different world we're talking about. We also have a product catalog of, I don't know, 25,000 standards. It's not the same as selling a tangible technology-driven product. So that's one thing. And the other thing I wanted to mention is, I think all of us here, the members, the National Standards Body, we have the same sales profile of our products. So it looks like a dragon, right? We have a huge spike of sales in a very few standards, and we have this immense tail of 1,000 of standards that only sell a couple. So this is the world that we live in. And it's really hard to address customer needs when you have this diversity of a portfolio. And then if I look a little bit back and look at what we have done in Danish Standards, and I'm sure this is mirrored in many of our colleagues, we do a lot of things to try to tailor our services, our standards, our platform to customers. So we do marketing analysis, we do customers' personas, we ask them every year, are you satisfied with what we offer, and so on. We try to digitalize. This is something we have discussed during the whole week. So we do some things to try to cater for the needs. So what I'm trying to say is that we have done something to do something for our customers, but of course we're not there yet, right?
There's a long journey ahead of us, I'm sure.
Definitely is.
Khaled, if you could talk a little bit about Sasso. You have quite a substantive program on kind of listening to the customer. How do you do that? How do you systematically understand their pain points, the benefits that you can generate, and actually build that into everything that you do as an organization?
Absolutely, Karen. That's a very actually interesting question, because I think not many of you know, Sasso is just not looking over standards itself. It has different business lines. So we have different 18 business lines, and here where it gets a little bit tricky. So the idea is, as any other businesses, you need to start thinking about a strategy first. So you need to put a strategy in place, and then you need to have a plan to how to implement the strategy. Then you need to have tools later on to try and analyze everything and what you're doing. And basically after that, if you have a privilege of having an assessment from a third party, just to make sure that you're actually doing the right thing. Now, the idea is, if we're talking about our organization, the Saudi Standards, Sasso, we drafted a customer experience strategy, and that customer experience strategy has been actually driven by the overall country strategy, which is the Kingdom Vision of Saudi Arabia, Vision 2030. Now, some of the objectives and pillars in the vision were actually to make sure to have an effective government bodies, and to make sure to actually lift up a little bit the services that government bodies and non-government bodies as well provide for customers or beneficiaries. So we started from there, then we cascaded this into our strategy, and we actually built, we built a plan to do that as well, and we put KPIs to measure these, plans that we're doing. So basically, we have two strategic KPIs on a strategic level that our board of directors monitor on a monthly basis, which is the customer satisfaction, CSAT, and the customer effort score. Now, this is in terms of strategy. Now, in order to implement the strategy, we have to look at the plan itself. So the plan, or the outline of the customer experience that we have, is let's look into procedures. And procedures are the flow of each process that you have within, the organization itself. Once you put these procedures together, you will come with a service, a meaningful service. And this service come up with a customer journey. So the customer journey is the start of the engagement up until you provide the service itself. Then you actually make sure to monitor the whole thing by the customer experience controls that you have in there. Now, this is number 2. Number 3, which is the tools and the analysis tools that you use. Basically, we have used the Customer Experience Professional Association map, which is an association based on the USA. It has 5 different stages. So basically, it starts with, the discovery, how the customer discovered the service itself. Then it goes to the purchase. What kind of purchase medium you got? Is it Apple Pay? Is it credit card? Is it direct transfer? Then you go to the delivery. So basically the delivery method of the service itself. Later on, you move to, the revisit of the whole process. Is the customer actually, or the beneficiary actually satisfied with all of this? Now, again, feedback is important. So we have what we called a voice of customer tools. So we would like to hear the customers, and we try to measure the feedback based on several, tools that we have or we use. Basically, we have QRs, So when you purchase a standard, you get a QR, you answer a couple of questions, then we know that you're satisfied with this or not. We know that it wasn't easy or not. So it's kind of thing. You have a questionnaire, you have surveys, we have a service management tool, and as well as we listen to our social media, and we have a social media management tool as well. And all of that is being integrated to our customer resources management program, which is our CRM.
Great.
Basically, once all of this is done, if we have the privilege to have a third party to look into our practice, then they would give us a feedback. They do mystery shopping. They would go and meet up with some clients. They would ask the clients if they faced any issues or problems while, having the journey. And I think this will sum it up all. Yeah.
Fantastic. I want to come back to both you and Maria as well to try and understand from your perspective, what are your programs telling you? What are the biggest pain points? What your customers would like? But let's ask a customer here. Alistair's a regulator here in Australia, but he's a great user of standards. And Alistair, can you tell us, what is your greatest barrier as a user of standards? And if you had a little magic wand here for all this crowd that has the capacity to hopefully affect change into how we deliver the content and deliver to meet your needs, what would that be?
Look, for us at ARPANSA being the regulator, one of the barriers that we have is just the general cost and then the application of those standards across regulatory requirements. One of the things that we find is that it'd be great to be able to specify standards in our regulatory requirements, but we just can't. And then obviously back to that, where we do have our regulatory guides, it's hard for us to reference the standards in those guides because we'll then have to provide them to our licensees. Probably not so much of a problem for us, being that we're the Commonwealth regulator and that we don't have a large number of regulated entities, but when these regulations get flown down to the states and territories where there may be a couple of thousand regulated entities per state, it then becomes a problem that all of a sudden we're now imposing a financial barrier for some organisations to operate in those areas.
And how do we fix that for you?
It'd be an interesting one, but one of the things would be like a government-wide licensing agreement where we could purchase a different license that allowed us to share it among licensees or committee members or so on and so forth.
Yeah, the flexibility piece, I think, is quite an important one. Yesterday, some of us were at the Strategy Cafe Monday, where that point came across quite strongly, that we just need to have more flexible models. You gave us an example of something that you had to do to satisfy the needs of some of your committees, and it was horrible.
It was horrible. So it's just where we had to purchase a second set or a third set or a fourth set of standards to provide to our committee members, because we couldn't share our digital copy. And for us here in Australia, a little bit of a barrier at the time is that we could only get printed copies, because if we purchased a digital copy for each of these members, we couldn't share it. So we actually had to go and order physical copies, have them delivered, then post them back out to all the committee members, and that was a little bit frustrating.
Painful.
Yeah.
Yes, no doubt. Maria, did you want to?
That's why we are working on digital models, right? To make it easier
Yes.
for you and regulators. I think, Khalid, you will come back to that, but regulators are super important for us, and that's also part of our backbone as standards bodies. So, but there are different tools to overcome. They won't be for free, though. I think.
Why not, Maria? Why can't we have free standards?
Yeah, sponsored access. Yeah, we have sponsored access. Let's talk about that.
Great. Una, your organization, and it would be great if you could explain just a little bit what Logic does, but you sit at this intersection between kind of the standards development body and also customers. So you clearly identified, your organization identified a market gap, and you were able to actually deliver to those needs. How did that come about? And then how do you stay close to your customer, and what do you need also from the ISO community to continue to deliver on that?
So what we have is a software as a service company that provides a quality management system, and there's a couple of really important things to say here is that, you know, when you're designing something like a software, and I take it, Maria, it's not like standards, but when you're designing something like that, you've got to be driven by the customer. In the first place, we came about putting a solution on the table in response to our customers, who were our consultancy clients, having difficulties in interpreting the requirements of standards, and then being able to generate evidence reports for the certification bodies as they were coming through. And some of our clients have, you know, like 14 different types of standards that they have to meet. And so there's a huge impost on the organisation to be able to sort of gather the evidence, or just fundamentally understand the requirements, implement the requirements, or translate them, implement them, and then generate the evidence. And so we could see that there was a gap. And so this is about sort of listening to our customers. We were developing things that you would typically develop, like an Excel spreadsheet, and, you know, it's centralised, it's not shared. Somebody becomes quite powerful in the organisation. They tend to have that sort of personality type that likes to grab onto power, and, you know, all of the associated problems that you can imagine that go with all of that sort of modelling. So having something like a software that can democratise it, share it, decentralise it, do all of those things and enable people and empower people to be part of it is really part of the solution. Now, going back to your question, Karine, when we first put it out there, we were responding to what we saw as the customer needs. But I would have to say, and I've said this 1,000 times, that since we put it into the marketplace, that was the last time we were ahead of the game. After that, it was our clients who actually constantly gave us feedback. And of course, we use our help desk every time. And Steve Jobs was mentioning this with customer experience. Every time we have an issue through our database where they're asking for support or help, that's building a database for us to understand the clunkiness of our software. Or every time someone's putting in, sort of saying, because we've got a feedback line saying, tell us what you think could improve, that has generated years of development. Just by way of example, we put it into the marketplace over 13 years ago, and in the first year we thought, right, done, dusted, got a product, put it on the shelf, let's sell it. We've been in development ever since. It hasn't stopped because constantly clients are wanting more from it. So having mechanisms in place to be able to gather the information. And I think that if I look at 9001, one of its major inputs, if you look at the cycle, the basic cycle is, one of the major inputs is customer experience. And so it has to be part of the story. And I think that if you had that daily experience of the customer coming in, all of a sudden things like, I think, access, price, interpretation, languages, application, all of those things would be stacking and reminding the central body of just the difficulties. And I think that in itself is a really, it's got to be coming into your face. Once you start seeing that you've got customers having these same issues, they start to become real problems. And I think you need that. So I think, you need something that's going to empower people to contribute and then enable them. And so the typical things would be a ticket desk, worldwide ticket desk for people who use standards. Give us your feedback, let it build, empower your community to contribute.
I love this point because, you can collect all the data and the information, but you also need to act on it, right? And Khalid, you mentioned and you talked about your program, but how do you, so we've established it's really important to listen to the customer, but how do you actually create that culture in the organization where you're constantly, as Una described, delivering to meet those customer needs?
Yeah, absolutely. Basically, to understand exactly where we need to go and to make sure that we develop a lot of awareness within the organization itself. So basically, making sure that SASO is actually a partner and it's there and it's part of the ecosystem itself. And making sure that most of our, SASO employees, or if you want to call it, or so people who works at SASO, to understand that they are part of a whole circle. They are not just standing alone over there doing the standards by themselves and that's it. Still there are other stakeholders, there are customer personas that we need to actually identify. We need to make sure where SASO fits. And by the end of the day, we need to understand that we actually trying to wave the way for other businesses to come in. And once we understand that actually, you know, we're on that part or on that area, you start, you know, driving changes within the organization itself. So basically, what we're trying to do today in SASO, we're trying to do meetups with other colleagues. We're trying to do, we have done something like that in SASO, and we sat down with a lot of our colleagues, and we start talking about why do we need to make sure that every part and every one of us actually is a customer-centric and more of, on a customer service-based, let's say, ideas, and try to help all the customers or beneficiaries, as we like to call it, within the organization itself.
So what you're saying is that it's really changing the culture, ensuring that you're embedding the customer-centric culture within your organization.
Exactly. And not just that, not just trying to change the culture, but make sure that they understand why do we need to do that. Because we're not just impacting ourselves, we're actually impacting others as well. We're a part of, a whole ecosystem.
Yeah. Great.
But maybe I can
Yes,
just comment on
Yeah.
that, because you mentioned the QR codes.
Yeah.
And this is actually something that was made in the Customer Matters program that we had here as part of the ISO strategy. And I think that's a little bit along the lines that you have depicted, Una, that you have somewhere where the customers can chip in and give feedback. So this QR code that is now rolled out and to a certain few number of members, and will be open to others as well. So when a customer buys a standard, there's this small QR code. If they really want to, they can scan it, and then there are 3 simple questions. So was this useful? What was the obstacle? And I can't remember the third question, but you get some instant feedback from the customers. And of course, it's not everybody who wants to do it, but if you would just have 1 in every 10 or 1 in every 20 customer who does that, you will get this immediate feedback that you can use. So I think that's an excellent way of getting this immediate and instantaneous feedback. Also, I want to mention something that we have done in Danish standards. We have actually created FAQs, so frequently asked questions for standards that are out there and working, but which may be subject to interpretation. Something is not super clear. We can have customers and users writing questions to the Mirror Committee in Denmark, and then they will come out with an interpretation, or what we mean here is actually this and this and this, and we put it on the webpage for free. So it's actually a help to the customer how to interpret, how to use this standard, and I think that's an excellent tool as well. And the upside of this is also you can use it for when you go in review mode of that standard, then you have collected a lot of useful information. So we need those feedback mechanisms to be in place and to work for basically all of our standards, which is...
I want to come back to something that you said earlier, which was, the challenge around, I think the ISO catalog is over 21,000 standards, and I think customers increasingly are looking for personalization in a sense of your needs will be different to a regulator may have very different needs to industry. How do we do this as a community with such a vast catalog and really deliver, and how do we prioritize, right? Because there are finite resources, it becomes really difficult to do it. How did you crack that, Maria?
Yeah, when we had the strategy cafe Monday, right, this question also came up at our table. So to actually select the right standard in this huge ocean of standards is really difficult. And I can't remember if it's you, Una, who pointed at why can't we create this ecosystem of standard? If you're looking for a certain area, well, first of all, you should be able to search and find that specific standard that fits the area that you're looking for. And then it's not only necessary with one standard, because they seldom come alone. They have a tendency to proliferate. We also see that in our system. So you have to find what are the connected standards. So it's an ecosystem. And then on top of that, you have the references, the normative references in the standard. So I think we could work on creating these more interactive maps going forward to sort of shape a family of standards. And it might be difficult, and maybe we cannot do it for all, but that would be something that could help our customers find the 1, the 10, the 20 standards that they need.
That was Tatiana, the colleague from
Yeah,
Canada.
it was, Tatiana. If you're here, then thank you.
Yeah. What I was going to say was the flip side of that, though, Marie. You've got the side where you're getting feedback from customers, so they can clip the, they can connect with through the QR code to give you feedback. But then there's the other side, understanding customer requirements. So at the beginning of the journey, so looking at strategies to sort of say what do our consumers need who use standards, and as you say, you've got regulators, you've got end users, you've got a whole range of people, you've got different industry types, but what do they need? And I think that's the bit that's possibly missing, is because that would actually in some ways drive development. And that's what Steve Jobs was actually saying at the start, is that let's not go and talk to the engineer about how to solve a problem or what we're going to do or how we're going to do it. Let's actually talk to the consumer. And find out, what is it that they need? What is it? Talk to the consumer. What are your requirements? Get that understanding of requirements, and then drive the solution.
And that's what we were talking about just before we came in here at the corner. Like the QR code, it's a great idea, but we didn't know about it. And if Una and I didn't come here, we still wouldn't know about it. So, whilst it's good trying to get the feedback from your customer, if your customer's not aware of it, then your customer's not aware of it.
Yeah, I was actually going to ask you that exact question. Like, when was the last time you gave feedback to Standards Australia or to ISO? And
Yeah.
clearly, the answer is never.
Clearly, outside of the designated period, we haven't. Obviously, I'm on technical committees. A lot of our Panzer is on technical committees, so we do give feedback on regular occasions, but it's only through that mechanism.
Yeah.
I wasn't aware until I spoke to you the other week that there was actually a formal mechanism where we can give feedback. And that sort of promotion is probably needed for your customers. And once again, I'll bring back 9001. It's a requirement in 9001 that you actively seek that feedback from your customer. And it's something that maybe we should, as a standards group, look at.
I would just want to come back to something that you said as well, where you said, well, let's try and understand the customer requirements. But Alistair just told us what it is. He needs like free or cheap standards. Can we do that? And I think, do we flip it in a way of saying, let's understand their pain points potentially, rather than saying, because the customer is always going to say, I want free, and I want, things that we may not be able to deliver.
Yeah.
How do you do that in your environment if you're asking the question, but it's not necessarily aligned with your business model potentially?
Yeah, I mean, it is. It's a constant thing because everybody always wants, the platform to be able to sort of create rockets and go to the moon. You know? They want integrations with Hero. They want it to do this. They want it to do that, and they're really surprised that a SaaS product can't do all of those things. And I always think, well, why don't they go and ask Steve Jobs, or or why can't they, feed into their development pipeline? But anyway, I think it just gets to the point where it becomes critical, and you realise that if you don't deliver, you're actually holding back a whole range of customers who are going to be dissatisfied. But then there are things that fall outside of it, and you just have to say, well, you're agile and you're flexible, but it's going to cost. And so and I think people back away as soon as you put cost on the table, people will back away. But there are points where I think what you would realise is that there are things where, we are doing ourselves a disservice if we don't do something because there's becoming a critical mass. I was surprised yesterday that some of the standards weren't in certain languages. Because I come from an English-speaking country, I just always assumed that everyone else had access to standards, but I didn't know that. And I think if there was a half of the world sort of saying that they couldn't access standards because it wasn't in their language, and that should really bring it to the top of the pile. Yeah.
SASO and Denmark, you obviously have programs in place. Not all of the ISO members, the Customer Matters program at ISO is great. There's a toolkit. If you'd like to talk to any one of us about it, we would be very happy to share a little bit more. What would be your advice to a member that doesn't have a program, it's not listening to the customer yet? How do they start? What would be your suggestion on the first steps to get there?
Absolutely, Karen. I think I'll go back to to the first point that we just talked about. Basically, try to put a plan. Where do you want to reach? Or to put a strategy, then put a plan, then try to see what type of tools that actually fits to execute that plan. And again, I will go to something that Alistair just said and Una. Just to remind ourselves, we're basically a national standard body, and again, one of the requirements in the 9001 is actually to listen to our customers. So we should start from ourselves first. We start listening to our customers first. Then if you want to implement something, you start with yourself before you, go and impose it on other people. So just basically follow a strategy, break it down, put a plan, try the tools, and there is a lot of actually free tools around you could try. I think one of the great places to visit is the Customer Experience Professional Association in the USA. They provide all of these maps and tools you can use, and they give actually insights for free as well. And they have other programs, paid programs that you can enroll in and understand what's going on. But basically, we should start with ourselves and clean our house first and follow the 9001. Yeah.
Great. Maria?
Yeah, I can add on that. I think we are so many members here that have our own experiences with looking at our customers, doing personas, investigations. We do a yearly customer review. We have a plethora of information. So one advice would also be to, when we are at a General Assembly, talk to your fellow NSBs. Tap into the knowledge that we have already generated, because there's a lot of information. So it could help those NSBs, those members that are not so well underway with understanding customer needs. Look at what we have. We're here, yeah.
Great, thank you. All right, we have some questions coming in. There's an interesting one here, and I think we've kind of talked a little bit about it, but not necessarily the solution. And that is, our difficulty as users is how to interpret standards and relate them to our processes. Could you give us insights regarding this matter? I want to ask you, Alistair, from your perspective, how do you help? And I'm sure you have a bunch of Australian citizens that will probably contact you and say, I don't really understand what these requirements are. So from an end user and a regulator, how do you deal with that?
Yeah, so fortunately for us, where we have an inquiry from the Australian public, we generally direct them to the writer of that code or standard.
Yeah.
Now, they're more than likely not related to an ISO standard, but as the quality manager for the agency, I also implement other ISO standards. We also use ISO standards throughout our organisation and in our testing laboratories. And part of that, we need to take the time to understand all of the standards. We have lots of very smart people, but even so, it's still not in what we consider plain simple English or plain simple understanding. So you still have to read it, you still have to think about it, then you have to go back, read them again, and rethink about it, and often vet check it or run it past some of your other colleagues to make sure that you've actually interpreted what the standard is saying. And that's especially pertinent when you're looking at some of the technical documents or the technical standards for testing and certifications of products and services.
Maria or Khalid?
Yeah, I think there's a huge difference in what kind of standard we're talking about, because when we look at the management system standards that you now also are using in your system, it's very abstract. It's high-level language. It can be hard to understand. What do I do in practice when I want to implement it? So here I can see there's some real issues, how to fill it out, so to speak. And then we have the technical standards, and I'm sure the technical people who are going to implement those, they would probably understand everything. Mm-hmm. So there's a huge difference.
There is.
And then I think there's always a bargain to be made when you do standards or when you do document like this, because you have to have a unambiguous, clear, relatively abstract level language in order to make it uniform and usable. And that costs on the level of understanding that you can have as a normal reader. So there's always a bargain to be made. If we make it too easy, then it's not useful. If it's too hard, then they give up before they start. And that's why we also need companies like yours, because we need the intermediates. But I don't think it can stand alone.
And I work particularly in the health sector, or our company works particularly in the health sector, and we're lucky because of one of the versions that you did develop as an application against 9001 was for health services. So, and this actually drove the whole health industry in Australia. All the day hospitals, when they were coming out and having to meet standards, they had a guidebook. And that guidebook, and even if you're a different type of service and not even a health service, the thing about health is everybody is a consumer of health, so everyone has the experience of health. So when you read the guide and you see it, there's some aspects of it that you may not understand because you're not within health, let's say, but everything else you do, because even if you're not in health, you can use the health guidebook. So it's been fantastic. And it was written for the I think the 2008 version, or it might have been the earlier version, but there was minimum difference, and there's still a lot of overlap, and so it's been great. Yeah. And so I think, having those applications that sit alongside that say this is what we're talking about, like validation, for instance. What does the validation mean within health? It means feedback, but who would use that word? Nobody. But in other industries, validation would be a really important word, and technical experts would immediately know it because that's where the language came from. But within health, validation is like, what? Yeah,
that's a great point. A lot of the technical guides we use as well. So we'll buy the standard. We'll also buy the technical guide, and that's technical guidance helps us understand and apply them, which is excellent. So
yeah.
But isn't there a problem here that if you actually need a technical guide to explain the standard, we failed on how we actually crafted the standard in the first place?
So one of the great things about the management series standards, which you probably don't want to hear, is there's lots of grey. So it's not black and white. So it's one of the joys that I take as a professional auditor as well is being able to essentially discuss things that might not be right, but it's the way that the organisation wants it to be. So when we have our auditors come out from NATA in our particular instance, we can use that grey section because they're not right, we're not wrong, so it's in that grey. So you have to have that, and I understand why we have that, especially in the management series standards, and that's where the technical guides help you apply that, and it helps you understand why it doesn't say that you must do this and you must do that and you can't do this. That's where the technical guides help you with that understanding, is it gives you that little bit more in depth of what the intent was of that particular standard, and some of them are related to those specific industries as well. So
Great. Una, there's a specific question for you here, well actually for the entire panel I think, but it was on your point and about software companies that are kind of helping make standards more user friendly. Why don't we have more of those?
More of those
organizations that are actually stepping in to fulfill that need.
Oh well, I think that's the whole consulting industry in Australia, for instance. I imagine it's worldwide, but the whole consulting industry in Australia is about sort of trying to help organisations interpret standards and implement the requirements, and not just for compliance, but also there's standards themselves can bring rigour to process and credibility and validity, and if you're using ISO 9001 as with other standards as well, it just drives sort of a learning organisation. So it values the things that we do wrong in terms of considering what we could do better, and ensures that those things are feeding in and the organisation's improving. So organisations are wanting to use rigorous processes to improve, and I think standards really fit in well there to be able to enable that. And
Great. Khalid, maybe your reflections on this one. So it doesn't say which country, but the standards organization in my country doesn't seem to care about customer feedback. How can they change their attitude?
Oh, that's a good question. Okay. Basically, any change have to start within. So we have to understand again. As I just said, we have to understand that what kind of role are we playing as a standard. Now, some people might say that some standards are actually mandatory based on technical regulations, and other standards are voluntarily. Should we still listen to the customers because it's mandatory or not? And here again, we have to listen to our customers. And why? Because basically, as a standard body, we need to understand that our main concern is, let's say, product safety. So if we understand that the product safety is our concern, and we jump into customer safety as well, then we understand that it's our job to lift these kind of understanding and to start making sure that we imply them within our region. Now, again, how to encourage such a thing within an organization? We have to start within the organization itself and make sure that we actually changing the way the organization think, the way the organization approaches certain subjects. And I believe, again, once we understand that, okay, standards is a part of a whole, economy, and it's a part of the whole GDP, it's a part of the whole ecosystem, because basically when you want to go into manufacturing, you have to use standards. You want to go into the surface industry, you have to use standards as well. It's voluntarily in some areas, but in some areas it's actually restricted by technical regulation. And as an NSP ourselves, we have to listen to all our customers, basically not just, okay, these are the voluntary ones we're going to listen to, and these are, the mandatory ones we're not going to listen to because they have to come to us,
So we don't care.
We don't care.
You
Yeah.
have to use
Yeah.
it anyway.
No, actually, we have to listen to everyone because basically we want to make sure to have a sustainable economy. We want to make sure to have a sustainable financial system within the NSP itself. We want to make sure that we're easing up the barriers of commerce, the barriers of manufacturing within the country itself. And all of this is actually our role as an NSP, and I'm talking about the case of Saudi Arabia.
I love this concept of, even though people have to
Yeah.
access because it's mandatory, you're still really in tune and focusing on the service that you were providing. And that I think that's quite impactful. And I know in the ISO community there are a number of members that are part of government as well, and it's something for others to consider too.
Yeah.
I might be able to add something to that. So as a federal government organisation, typically we're hard to approach, and I think that's globally similar to standards. So what our Panzer did probably 7 years ago was we started a program called Talk to the Scientist, where any member of the public can email, call in between set hours, and actually talk to a scientist in that specific area. So here in Australia, we have some hot topics around power line radiation, 5G telecommunications, and obviously sunscreen and sun radiation. So you can actually call Tuesdays and Thursdays after 11 and 1 and talk to a scientist who not only developed the standard for Australian standards, but also every day practices the safe testing of radiation in Australia. So that could be something that standards could look at, is talk to a standard.
Absolutely.
That's fascinating. We have a few questions. So this is one specific for Marie and Khalid. And what are some of the challenges that you may have faced in your organizations in fostering this customer-centric culture? And how do you bring your employees closer to the customer? Maria, if you want to have a go first.
Oh, what are the challenges we have met? Well, I think there are two sides of that. One is maybe more internal, so getting the organization to think more market and customer driven, because as we all know, we run this standardization process. It's a churn, it's a machine that runs, and to look up and think about the customer may not always come naturally when you have a process heavy industry like we have. So I think there's an internal aspect in getting the organization ready and the mindset broadened to think about customers in general. And then there's the other side of it, and I think that's those that develop the standard or contribute to the standard, that they also need to understand that actually there's somebody apart from them in the end that are going to use the standard. So they also need to be educated or need to be in close dialogue with their host national body. What is the assignment here? Why are we doing this? And I think this goes for most of us or all of us, that we are driven by societal needs. Like you said, Khalid, this is about safety and products and consumers. So I think if we can embrace or embed this thinking in ourselves, in our organizations, and also with those that develop the standards, that we do this for the greater good and the economy,
Absolutely.
then I think customer needs will come along the way, and then we need some processes and some mechanisms to secure it, the plans and the strategy that you're pointing at. But yeah, so it's a mindset we need to engage in.
Did you want to add anything?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, as just Maria said, I mean, trying to understand the way that we think ourselves actually reflects on everything. Again, some people, you know, I have heard it before in the past that they would talk about customer experience, customer journeys, a lot of stuff. But again, you have to relate this with actually the business needs and with the financial performance and everything else. Because why are we doing this? Why are we doing customer experience? Why are we listening to our customers? Basically, to have a return customer.
Yeah.
I mean, bottom line. Again, one of the ideas that I see actually SASO has implemented a couple of years back, and it's actually very beneficial for SASO to do such a thing, to engage private sector within the technical committees itself. So basically we have customer personas, which is private sector, government entities, and let's say individuals, and academias, and all of these. Then we try to invite all of these into our technical committee and have a diversified technical committee that each one actually has something to say. You know, if a customer says, you know, well, we're not going to understand this type of standards, the language is going to be too harsh. If you bring it to our industry, it's not going to work. So we have to listen to them, and we start, you know, implementing changes as well.
I love days of, you know, really thinking and getting our experts to start thinking about who's our target audience, how are they engaging with the content, how can we actually help them do the jobs that they need to do. There is a no.
Just to add something,
yeah,
because we're talking about the technical committee and the experts, they need to embrace this thinking. But I guess most of us, we also have kind of sounding boards or advisory boards. So we also need to engage with customers at a little bit, you know, more strategic or political level. So what are the needs out there? So at least in Denmark, we have like a standardization policy forum where we invite the most important business organizations, other organizations, also consultancy businesses, and they give us feedback on the more general policy aspects. So that can complement the more technical things,
Right.
but we need to engage with customers on a various dimensions.
There's a really good question here. I think we're good at getting new topics off the ground at ISO, but we struggle to innovate our own business model. And the example is speed up the standardization process, provide new formats for standards usage, smart. So does this disruption, so questioning the status quo, end up being diametrically opposed to our process orientation and zero error culture? Who wants to take that? Khalid?
It's not easy.
It's not an easy.
Yeah. I mean, I believe 2 days ago there was a discussion on this same place. They were talking about AI, and that some of the points that being discussed were about do we actually standardize AI or do we regulate it? And I guess it's this question that actually even a lot of people ask. So some stuff, should we standardize these stuff? Should we standardize these new technology and innovations, or should we just regulate them and keep it under regulations? Because it's evolving fast, it's changing fast, it's going through a lot of changes. Or should we just put a general standard for something, then let the regulators play their game? Again, I think we should, as NSPs and as, I'm not talking about ISO, I'm talking about maybe ourselves, to start from ourselves first, to start developing mechanism to try and cope with all of these technologies and new things that are coming up, and to try to find ways to actually speed up the process itself. Smart being one thing of it, because today you can actually, with ISO Smart and the smart standardization, you could actually speed up the process, and instead of having all of these pile of papers and PDFs and start going through a lot of things, you could actually do the changes a little bit more easier, and the integration to the business itself could be more easier as well. So basically, there is no right or wrong answer to that. And it's always going to be a challenge, but we need to actually think about it in a different way. We need to, have our people innovate in these areas and start to think outside the box a little bit. Yeah.
Did you want to
Yeah,
comment?
I think it's a balance, right? Because the rules and processes that we have gives us a security, it gives us a system we maneuver in, it gives consistency to the product that we deliver, and we have everybody on board. But the downside to this is, of course, that it's really hard to change something. And we have a tendency, I will admit that, to say, look, we put this in a strategic advisory group and we'll talk about it in 18 months. So we have to balance those things. It's good to have rules, but we cannot wait forever. So we have to do something faster now, and I think we see some of the signs already. We are talking about using our international workshop agreement tool a little bit more often. We are also talking about PAS, so the publicly available specification. So getting something out soon, a little bit faster, see how it works, and then use that as a point towards the final standard. So I think we are on the track, we are on the right track, but we should be careful that we do not put things on a shelf too long. And I think AI and smart, good examples, not that I'm saying they're on the shelf, but we have to do something, and we are doing something, and we could definitely do more.
Who's doing this well? I mean, as a customer, like who is doing this well, and where should we actually be kind of taking some of the inspiration to change?
I'm just thinking in my head, all of the problems that we've been discussing, and Una might say here, but why don't you guys get 9001 certified? No, because the question that you just asked is, go and talk to some of your customers for 9001, especially some of your larger customers like Apple, Microsoft, some of those customers, because they're going to be in a similar base, large organisations, multiple sites across the world that are having the same issues. They need to listen to their customer, they need to rapidly change, especially with the advent of like AI and other technologies. It could be worthwhile that you actually reach back to some of your larger customers. So reach out to your consultants and see who are they consulting to. Reach out to organisations like CQI, and they'll be able to provide you with information on who's doing it particularly well.
But Maria, I'd say Karine, I'd say it was a great question. And I think that there are just so many great models out there that they could be used. I mean, there are just so many products that we all use now that have just gone voomp, and they did it so well. And where did it come from? It came from consumer voice. And I think, I imagine that everyone here probably has, Spotify. Where did that come from? And where is it? And where everyone's using it. It's just, so, and I think there's some parallels actually between standards, because you've got like a library, an international library, and Spotify is an international library of music. You've got, what we're talking about is the quality of products and services to protect the consumer. I think you've got easier, better, safer. It's a great line, and it's out there as a global product. And I think there's just so many great models out there that you could really sort of do some work and sort of looking at, well, how, what were the fundamental ingredients that actually made it go wow. Yep.
There's a practical question, and maybe both of you can reflect on how you do this in your NSP. So how frequently the feedback has to be collected, and how do you prioritize and take the feedback to be worked upon? Like, what is the cadence of your program? And maybe you as well, you were kind of already said that it's ongoing. It's coming in all the time.
Yeah.
How do you do it, Colleen?
Well, it depends a little bit on the tool or the way we collect the information, but I would say we do annual customer satisfaction surveys. We do regular monitoring of Google Analytics, SoMe data, all that stuff. We have regularly regularly meetings with those policy forums that I mentioned. We also do satisfaction surveys with our mirror committees. So there's a number of different solutions. So I would actually say that we collect it fairly often. And you know what is hard? It's actually hard to react, you know, in a good manner, because sometimes this was actually okay, but what should we change, and will it actually affect the results? So I think we don't lack the information. Maybe sometimes it's a little bit hard to know what then to develop and do differently. Yeah, that can be a challenge.
Yeah, that's actually great. I mean, again, if we're gonna go back to SASO Saudi Arabia, we have to put in mind that it's actually a big variety of businesses. So we like to keep a very tight ship to understand. You know, we have different 18 different business lines. One of the business lines has around 50 million users of the service every 3 years. So you're talking about maybe 15, 17, 16 million a year, which is a huge number. So in order to do such a thing, we have an automated tools that actually each time you get a service, it will send you a text, it will send you an email, and sometimes we do random checks to call the customers and make sure that they are actually satisfied with whatever kind of service they get. And we use keywords within these surveys and within these questionnaires. So basically, if the customer wrote something, he or she wrote something that actually might trigger something that shows that he's not satisfied or she's not satisfied, then we have to make sure that this customer will pops up, and we have to call the customer and make sure to have a phone call with that customer to understand exactly what was the problem. So we use some keywords within our system to make sure that we're on the actually right path. Again, other businesses, SASO businesses, has maybe much less number of customers, but again, we try to measure it every month. We try to measure our scores and our KPIs every month, as well as we have to present it to our board of directors, and they want to make sure that we're always above 80. So if we're not above 80, then
You're not doing your job.
you're not doing the work. Exactly.
Excellent. I'm conscious of time, but I want to ask maybe Una and Alistair, from your perspective, what is the simplest but most meaningful change that we can effect as a standards community that you think it would help our customers? Una?
I'd have to definitely say application and interpretation of standards to make sure that every guidelines, if you compare yourselves to industry standards, they all come out with guidelines. So if we're talking about disability, mental health, education, childcare, all of those standards sit with those very clear standards, but sitting alongside them there's an application, like this is what it would look like in practice, this is your evidence guide. The other thing that it does, and I'll be really fast here, the other thing that evidence guides do is they boost inter-rater reliability between auditors. And so you feel like you're being judged fairly. Yes, it takes a little bit of that grey away, but then again, you can have standards like for the ISO 9001 for restaurants, ISO 9000 or the service industry, or ISO 9001 for, healthcare. So you can have broad sectors, but I think it's great for consumers to understand the requirements of standards, and I think that they've got something to be able to hold a certifier accountable, saying where does it say that I need to do that, and I think that would be great as well.
I think accessibility. So making portions of the standard available, especially for manufacturers, where they don't need the whole standard, just making them so they can purchase or just have access to a limited portion. That would certainly make it more accessible for those organisations to comply. Yep. I think it's accessibility.
Yep.
Good points.
Great. We're coming to the end of the session. I want to say a huge thanks to the panelists and to everyone that submitted your questions and the engagement. I think for some organizations, you're already on the journey. For others, you might not even have started. But just a reminder that the ISO Customer Matters program has a range of resources. They're incredibly useful, and there's a lot to learn. So good luck on figuring out your customer journey and delivering to their needs. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. And look at the nice